evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, March 20th. Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to call a federal election on Sunday for a vote as early as April 28th. Sources would not confirm the specific date of the vote, but federal campaigns must run for at least 37 days. Canada's political parties have been mobilizing campaigns by nominating candidates and organizing leaders' tours. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was asked by the press for his thoughts on the timing of the election call.
Well, this is a decision of the Liberals. I've said very clearly that we are up against one of the most serious threats that we've seen in a generation when it comes to the economy. And I propose that we should put in place protections for workers first. We should guarantee that every worker in our country will have the ability to access a support that will keep a roof over their head, food on the table, and they can continue to pay their bills. I want to see that done first. I want to see a plan that creates jobs in Canada using Canadian content. I want to see that economic plan put in first, and then we go to an election. But it's clear that Mark Carney wants to go first in an election, and so that's what's going to happen. But we're ready for an election. And in this election, the choice is clear. Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre have already shown you they're in it for the billionaires. They're in it for rich CEOs. They're in it for those at the top. We're in it for you. We're in it for workers. And that's why we're so honored to receive the endorsement of United Steelworkers with great honor.
A Canadian ethics professor says Prime Minister Mark Carney could take additional steps to improve trust around his previous business dealings. Mr. Carney's assets were placed in a blind trust before he assumed office last week, cutting him off from seeing what's happening to his portfolio. A York University professor says that the Prime Minister should now set up screens with the Ethics Commissioner that would automatically excuse him from issues where he might have a conflict of interest. And this morning in a press conference, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre called on the Prime Minister to do the right thing and publish all of his financial holdings.
He admitted the other day in a stunning flip-flop that he has conflicts of interest that he will have to manage, but he won't tell us what those conflicts are. He expects us to elect him without knowing the many millions of dollars of conflicts that will make it impossible for him to do his job, interests that go against the national interest. And that is why today I'm calling on Mr. Carney to do the right thing and publish all of his financial holdings to everyone in Canada so that they can judge the conflicts he faces. He knows what he owns, and there's nothing in the law that prevents him from publishing that information for all eyes to see if he has got nothing to hide. We need a leader who's busy putting Canada first, not keeping an eye on investments that go against the Canadian interest.
Pierre Poilievre also announced he wants to create what he calls shovel-ready zones that would have pre-approved permits for major projects, resources, or energy projects. In a media statement, Mr. Poilievre said that the goal is to have permits in place for a mine, liquefied natural gas plant, pipeline, or other major project. The Conservatives say that the plan would make sure that the area is safe for Canada and the environment.
So today, I'm announcing that a Conservative government will bring forward Canada First shovel-ready zones, areas pre-approved for large-scale industrial and resource projects. This is how it will work. First, we will identify a spot that looks appropriate for a mine, a pipeline, an LNG plant, a power station, a hydroelectric dam. Second, we will make sure that the place is safe and that it won't harm the people or the environment to put the project there. Third, my government will do the necessary environmental studies in partnership and collaboration with the provinces, municipalities, and we will carry out the necessary constitutionally required consultations with the First Nations up front so that they don't have to, so that they can be done before the investors even step up. Fourth, we will when all of this is done, we will offer pre-permitting before we even get applications so that permits can be published online with a required checklist of actions that businesses must take to comply in protecting people and the environment. Then businesses would have all the information, legally binding, published online that they could use to make a real investment decision. This will be necessary after years of uncertainty where businesses spent billions of dollars in many years getting to a maybe. They will know that they have a yes up front. They can do the math, pencil it out, and get busy.
The Transportation Safety Board of Canada has released its report into a plane crash at Toronto's Pearson Airport last month that sent 21 people to the hospital. It found the aircraft's alert system indicated a high rate of descent less than 3 seconds before touchdown. All passengers and crew members survived when the Delta Airlines plane burst into flames after flipping over and skidding on the tarmac. Aviation expert John Graddick joined us for more on the report.
TSB, as usual, does a great job of looking at data gathering and getting some of the standards that are in place that are published for the carriers and for the pilots and everybody else to operate in. So in this case, they talk about these are the standards that Endeavor and Delta have in place for this type of aircraft and these types of landings. So they talk about, the standard should be the aircraft has to have pitch between 3 degrees and 9 degrees, and it should have anything over 600 feet per minute is considered a hard landing. And this aircraft, when they go through the data and they do a data analysis of the number of seconds before landing, it was very apparent to me, at least, that this aircraft was going over 1,000 feet per minute in terms of descent rate, and the nose pitch was a 1%. So that tells me it was exceeding the hard landing parameters, or it was in hard landing mode, and that the nose pitch was below standard. So that airplane came in pretty hard vertically, and it touched the ground, and caused the landing gear and the structure around the landing gear to collapse. Now, whether that landing gear collapse was due to, or the strut failure was due to either mechanical problems with the strut, could be mechanical failures, metal failures, fatigue, whatever it is, or it could be the impact of the aircraft on that runway. Don't know. So that's what the TSB is still going to be looking at: metal fatigue, metal failure, mechanical failure of components on that landing assembly. And they'll also be looking at stress testing that component in a hard landing mode. So there's work to be done. But, just looking at the data, not looking at the root cause yet, looking at the data, the operating environment of that airplane was such that, that landing gear was subject to mechanical forces that would be exceeding the normal standard practice that the airline has said that those aircraft are subject.
We also asked Mr. Graddick about the potential for pilot error as the root cause for the crash.
No, right now, there's no observation and there's no comment about pilot error in this one at all, because they didn't publish anything about the human factors in this airplane other than talk about the number of hours flown by these crew, the rest hours, the familiarity with landing at Pearson Airport, and those all check out. Both flight crew were thoroughly vetted on this aircraft. They had the hours required. The first officer, who was pilot flying, had in fact been to Toronto 3 times in the last week. So this was not an unknown airport to her. She understood the configuration of the airport. They talk about crosswinds. They talk about different wind conditions at the airport. Talk about visibility. And as far as I can tell, those are all things that these pilots are trained for. They do land in crosswinds. Not as if as soon as you have a crosswind leave, you go to another airport. These guys are trained to basically land these airplanes in crosswinds. How strong that crosswind was is still to be determined. The weather reports as contained in the report don't seem to me, at least, to be excessive crosswind. So as far as I was concerned, what the key element missing to date, and that's going to be part of the TSB report. They're not avoiding this. They're going to be part of that major report where they talk about root cause. Will be the state of conversation in the cockpit between those 2 pilots. Those 2 pilots should have been very talkative and very, very open in terms of what they saw was going on in configuring and in preparing for landing of that aircraft. And if they don't hear that conversation in the flight voice reporter, that would be an area of concern. But we'll leave that to the TSB to come up with, telling us what the story was in the cockpit prior to landing and whether the conversation was really focused on, maintaining the parameters that should have been set up for that aircraft to land.
Canada is in the advanced stages of negotiations with Europe on joining a new defense partnership. This is due to growing concerns over Ukraine and Donald Trump's talks of annexing Canada. In an interview with the Canadian press, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says Canada began talking to Europe about expanding security and defense ties almost immediately after Trump's 51st state rhetoric began. She says that the goal is to make sure ultimately Canada is closer to Europe than ever. In a press conference, NDP MP Charlie Angus urged Canadians to avoid travel to the United States.
But what concerns me is the targeting of Canadian citizens who are crossing the border to work or to visit. We have seen too many stories of citizens being pulled out of airport lines and being fingerprinted and deported as though they were criminals. Citizens being kidnapped through illegal detention by ICE. And it's not just Canadians. We see the attack on backpackers, students, doctors, professors. I am here today to say to Canadians to avoid travel to the United States if at all possible, and to call our government to stand up for our Canadian citizens who are being denied their rights by arbitrary detention in the United States today. The Canada must stand up for our citizens and for the rule of law.
This comes after a Canadian was detained for almost 2 weeks in inhumane conditions by U.S. border authorities over an incomplete visa. 4 Canadians have been executed in China this year, but Ottawa isn't releasing their names. China's embassy in Ottawa confirms Beijing executed the Canadian citizens and says the facts of the crimes committed by the Canadians are clear. Ottawa confirms the Canadians executed do not include BC's Robert Lloyd Schellenberg, who was sentenced to death in 2019. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says both she and former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asked China for leniency in all 4 cases.
So we strongly condemn the execution that did happen against Canadians in China. This is an issue that I've been following very, very closely personally for months, and I've asked personally also leniency, and also the former Prime Minister did so, and we made sure to press on China how much we needed to make sure that ultimately these Canadians would be safe. Therefore, we've been in contact with their families. I was even in contact last week with the team in China and in Ottawa that was supporting the families through these difficult moments. And we will continue to engage with China as we'll continue to not only strongly condemn, but also ask for leniency for other Canadians that are facing similar situations.
China launched a trade war with Canada today that has canola farmers caught in the crosshairs just weeks away from planting season. China is enacting a 100% tariff on Canadian canola oil and canola meal, plus a 25% duty on our seafood and pork exports. Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson expressed he wants to work with Saskatchewan and the farming community to diversify.
Well, I am concerned. I grew up in Saskatchewan. I used to work for a premier in Saskatchewan, so I know how important it is to the prairie economy. It's something that we obviously need to work with Saskatchewan and with the farming community to help us diversify our trading relationships and to ideally work to see how we can actually get the tariffs taken off.
The University of British Columbia has banned Chinese AI tool DeepSeek from university-owned devices and networks. The school says it reviewed public information and third-party assessments to conclude DeepSeek poses a high degree of privacy and security risk. The concerns involve DeepSeek's data collection and sharing, weak encryption, and its transmission of personal data. A university spokesperson says DeepSeek is the only AI tool banned at UBC, and there are no plans to restrict others like ChatGPT. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has agreed to a limited ceasefire between Kyiv and Moscow. U.S. President Donald Trump spoke with Zelensky on Wednesday and also suggested that the U.S. should own Ukraine's power plants. The White House says that Mr. Trump suggested the move to ensure the plant's long-term security.
President Trump fully briefed President Zelensky on his conversation with Putin and the key issues discussed. They reviewed the situation in Kursk and agreed to share information closely between their defense staffs as the battlefield situation evolved. President Zelensky asked for additional air defense systems to protect his civilians, particularly Patriot missile systems, and President Trump agreed to work with him to find what was available, particularly in Europe. The two leaders also agreed on a partial ceasefire against energy. Technical teams will meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days to discuss broadening the ceasefire to the Black Sea on the way to a full ceasefire. They agreed this could be the first step toward the full end of the war and ensuring security. President Zelensky was grateful for the president's leadership in this effort and reiterated his willingness to adopt a full ceasefire. President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
It was the first conversation between the two leaders since a disastrous Oval Office meeting that led to Mr. Trump temporarily pausing intelligence sharing and military aid to Ukraine. And yesterday, the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine submitted a report concluding that Russian authorities are committing crimes against humanity against Ukraine's civilian population through forced disappearances. UN Commissioner Vrinda Grover joined us for more on their findings.
So we have presented a report to the Human Rights Council in Geneva at the end of our third mandate. In a report presented a few months earlier, we had concluded that the crimes against humanity of torture was committed by the Russian authorities against the civilian Ukrainian population, particularly against those who are held in detention facilities, both in the occupied areas of Ukraine as well as in the Russian Federation. In our present report, we have now concluded that the crimes against humanity of enforced disappearances against the civilian population has been committed as part of a coordinated state policy in a widespread and systematic manner against the civilian population. A very large number of civilians are detained by the Russian authorities, and they are then transferred to different detention facilities. There are multiple transfers that have taken place with respect to some of those detained. The detentions have taken place both in the occupied areas of Ukraine by the Russians, as well as in detention facilities in the Russian Federation. Those who are then detained, the families of those, they have no information with respect to their fate or their whereabouts. The responses after the families are seeking and searching for them, given by some communications that are given by the Russian authorities, particularly the Ministry of Defense, are usually very standard replies, which even if they do inform sometimes of the fate, the whereabouts are still not known. And the persons who are disappeared, they can be disappeared for long periods of time, not just for months, some for years. Some have even died during this enforced disappearance. Their families have been looking and searching for them, and there is obviously, as can be understood, an agonizing uncertainty in waiting. Those who are detained also suffer and are become victims of multiple other violations, including torture, sexual violence while in detention. And in this way, they are kept away from the protection of the law.
We also asked the commissioner about what happens next in terms of holding Russian authorities accountable.
So accountability has to be carried out. We are a fact-finding, investigating mechanism. The accountability process, and we collect evidence, through a process of investigation, and very scrupulously and rigorously ensure that all the information is verified. Accountability mechanisms will exist in different places, both domestically within Ukraine. There is an accountability mechanism of Ukraine itself, but at the international level, you have the International Criminal Court, which undertakes accountability of crimes of this nature, like for the crimes against humanity, which is a crime coded under the Rome Statute. information, material, evidence, once collected and will then be scrutinized, and ICC does its own investigations also. Thereafter, accountability takes place both against, depending on what the evidence shows. For instance, our evidence confirms there were the FSB, as they are called in Russian, are present in detention facilities. They have committed or ordered torture to be committed, particularly during interrogations. So there are therefore entities who against whom there are certain crimes that are being arraigned. The accountability process, of course, is a much longer and will take place as this is pursued further over a period of time, but would take place through different entities and forums, particularly the International Criminal Court.
The Israeli military has intercepted the first rockets launched from Gaza since Israel's renewed offensive. 3 rockets launched at Israel from the Gaza Strip on Thursday set off sirens across the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Hamas claimed the attack, which appeared to be the first out of Gaza since Israel ended a ceasefire with a surprise bombardment on the territory on Tuesday. The Israeli military said it intercepted one of the rockets and 2 others fell in open areas. There were no reports of injuries. Earlier on Thursday, a missile launched toward Israel by Yemen's Iran-backed Houthis had been intercepted before it reached Israeli airspace. A spokesperson for Israel's prime minister called the attacks from the Houthis a war crime.
Let me be clear. Islamists, Hamas, and the Houthis, guided by Iran, firing rockets at civilians, aiming for maximum civilian casualties, is a war crime. Since October 7th, the Houthis have launched hundreds of attacks on Israeli cities. The IDF and our US allies have struck back and will continue to do so forcefully and decisively. If they are not deterred, they will be defeated forcefully and decisively.
The Toronto Sun's Brian Passafoom joined us from Tel Aviv for more on the attacks.
Yeah, so just about 4 a.m., the red alert sirens went off here in Tel Aviv, pretty much right across southern Israel, right to Jerusalem. That was caused by a ballistic missile launched from Yemen by the Houthi rebels. That was successfully intercepted before it reached Israeli airspace. But the attack was apparently targeting Ben Gurion Airport, which is just north of here. That's Israel's main airport. That was followed by another attack. I'm here as part of a press tour here in Israel. We were having a meeting. It's our last day here down in the conference room in our hotel, and everybody's apps went crazy. The sirens went off, and we were ushered to the shelter. And that was caused by a bunch of Hamas rockets launched by the Al Qassam brigades, which is Hamas's military wing. IDF said that they intercepted. They got they noticed 3 rockets on their system. One was intercepted by Iron Dome, and the other 2 fell into open areas. Typically, Iron Dome only intercepts rockets that threaten populated areas because obviously there's always the risk of debris falling on cities. Yeah, it's been a pretty tense time here. Israel ended the ceasefire on Wednesday. Hamas was not living up to the conditions of the ceasefire. It's a shaky ceasefire that's been in place since January. Hamas has refused to release more prisoners or more hostages. So Israel started with a bunch of strikes in Gaza. That's been met with some retaliation. There was a rocket attack in the southern Negev, just south of Tel Aviv, on Wednesday. So this is the third rocket attack that we've had here since the attacks began.
Speaking ahead of his address to the United Nations Security Council, Eli Sharabi, a former hostage released by the Hamas terror group in Gaza last month, spoke about inaction from international organizations like the Red Cross.
Where was the Red Cross when we needed them? Where was the United Nations? 491 days of torment, 491 days of starvation, of being chained underground. And no one came. No one in Gaza helped me.
While speaking to the UN Security Council, Mr. Sharabi outlined how Hamas starved him over the course of his 491 days in captivity.
We had to beg for food, beg to use the bathroom. Begging was our existence. We strategized over every meal. One day, I cut myself with a razor just to make them believe I was injured. I collapsed on my way to the bathroom so they would think I was too weak and encourage them to give us more food. It worked. They gave us more food. We survived of those small victories. Do you know what it means to open a refrigerator? It is everything. To be able to reach and take a piece of fruit, an egg, a piece of bread. I dreamt of this simple act every day. For months, we lived like this. I stopped counting the days. Living as a hostage, you don't know how the day will begin, nor how it will end. Whether you live or die. At any moment, they could beat you. At any moment, they could kill you. You wake up every day and do not know when you will be able to eat. It could be 12 p.m., 5 p.m., 11 p.m.
American immigration lawyers say that the case of a BC woman detained by U.S. border security over a visa issue should serve as a warning to others about crossing the border for work. U.S. immigration lawyer Jim Hacking says Jasmine Mooney is one of many recent cases where people are being detained or deported due to U.S. President Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration. Mr. Hacking mentioned that in his nearly 20 years of practicing immigration law, he has never seen someone with a visa like Miss Mooney's detained for several days. He believes that instead of denying her entry, Border Control's actions suggest a strategy to discourage all immigration to the U.S. He spoke with us earlier about Miss Mooney's case.
So under the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, Canadian nationals, Mexican nationals can get their visas actually processed at the border. It's sort of an unusual visa that way. And historically, most Canadians who work in the United States who have a TN qualifying occupation just show up at the border, they show them their paperwork, they get their stamp, and off they go. And so it's been pretty perfunctory for well over 20 years. And to see the problems and the shenanigans that are happening right now at the border, it's sort of eye-opening. I think that everyone from Canada or Mexico should expect that this tightening will continue, that life will be made harder. The Trump administration is intent on making life difficult, not only for illegal immigrants, but also legal immigrants. They basically don't want people coming here, and they want to be as antagonistic as possible. So, over the last 2 weeks, we've seen stories of green card holders, H-1B visa holders, L-1 visa holders, and TN visa holders not only get refused entry, which of course has happened over time forever, but there's a lot more media attention to it now because of the treatment that they're receiving. This actress who was taken into custody and sort of detained for 10 or 11 days at the border in San Diego it's sort of a ridiculous encroachment and acceleration of the way that they're processing these people. And I think it's really terrible.
We also asked Mr. Hacking what advice he would give to Canadians traveling to the U.S.
Interestingly, the TN process is a little bit easier for Canadians than Mexicans. So Mexicans actually have to go to the consulate and get a visa. And I think if I were a Canadian national, I would start thinking long and hard about that. Now, the tricky thing is that there's always these timing issues, right? Because a lot of TN visa holders sort of work close to the border, or they cross the border a lot. And so they have to be concerned with, well, if I do the actual application and try to get it from the embassy, is that going to slow me down? Is that going to mess up my travel schedule? I've really been saying since January 20th that people need to be thinking about the United States as having an invisible wall coming out around it. And so this idea of coming back and forth often is going to be a lot harder. I think you're going to see people having to stay in the United States or stay outside the United States for much bigger chunks of time. And a lot of that flexibility that's been there for Canadians is unfortunately going to dry up.
Lastly, we asked Mr. Hacking if the rise in detentions is part of the negotiating process for the Trump administration during the trade war.
No, I do not believe that this is a negotiation tactic. I believe that this is the white nationalism, the anti-immigrant sentiment, the hardcore right elements of the Project 2025 people who are now running the Trump campaign. If you look at Project 2025, this is all part of their playbook. This is exactly what they wanted. This is exactly what they promised, even though Donald Trump ran away from it during the election campaign. Stephen Miller and those of his ilk want to stop legal immigration to the United States. They want America first. They want to make it harder and more unsatisfactory for immigrants to stay in the United States, to work in the United States. And it's all ridiculous because the fact is the United States needs workers from overseas. Our population is dwindling. And of course, they view that as a threat to white republicanism. And so that's really what the problem is that they want to stop legal immigration. And finally, people are starting to wake up to the fact that that is really what their end game is. It was never just about illegals or closing the borders. It was about just making life hard for immigrants because they can.
U.S. President Donald Trump plans to sign an executive order calling for the shutdown of the U.S. Education Department. His plan, expected to be announced today, was disclosed by a White House official who spoke on the condition of remaining anonymous. Mr. Trump has labeled the agency as wasteful and polluted by liberal ideology. However, finalizing its dismantling is likely impossible without an act of Congress, which created the department in 1979. The Quebec government has tabled a bill that would expand the province's religious symbols ban to school staff beyond teachers. The bill aims to update Quebec's Education Act, requiring both students and staff to have their faces uncovered at school. It also expands a rule for employees at French language schools to speak only French with students and staff. For months, Education Minister Bernard Drainville has promised a law to strengthen secularism in schools after reports of religious practices at some public schools. Quebec's Secularism Law Bill 21 already bans public employees like teachers and police officers from wearing religious symbols at work. Manitoba's NDP government released its latest budget today, with new spending on job creation and some tax help for businesses expected. The document comes a day after the two men competing to lead the opposition Progressive Conservatives squared off in their final debate before a vote next month. Former cabinet minister Abi Khan pitched himself as a big tent conservative who could help the party regain support in Winnipeg. A hotel owner, Wally Dawrich, said that he is the only true conservative in the race and the party needs a more pro-business leader. He criticized the NDP's move to cover the cost of prescription birth control, saying it allows vulnerable women to be more sexually active instead of offering them housing or other services. Saskatchewan's government says it will ride a strong economy to a projected razor-thin surplus in this year's budget. However, it warns that tariffs could create problems, possibly causing a $1 billion shortfall. The government is projecting a $12 million surplus this year with $21 billion in spending, and it expects even bigger surpluses in the future.
The forecast surplus is $12 million. This year's surplus is driven by forecast revenues of $21.1 billion, which is an increase of $1.2 billion, or 6%, compared to last year. Revenues are forecast to increase due to a combination of increased corporate income tax, PST, and uranium resource royalties as construction activity and our population continue to grow. Total expense is projected to be $21 billion, an increase of $909 million, or 4.5% from last year's budget.
Health and education spending will stay at current levels, while the budget banks on benefiting from a rising population, growing oil and uranium revenues, and stabilizing markets for potash. Steep discounts and empty shelves marked Hudson's Bay department stores across Canada this week as the country's oldest retailer pushes to liquidate its remaining inventory. This has left shoppers feeling nostalgic and thousands of jobs at risk. We spoke with historian Stephen Bown about what the loss for the Bay means for Canada historically.
Well, I mean, as a historian, it's kind of sad for me to see the disappearance of the iconic retailer, and the physical architectural presence of that retailer in the major areas of our cities was a tangible portal into understanding 355 years of our nation's history. The Hudson's Bay Company literally founded the relationship between English commerce and Indigenous peoples and Indigenous commerce. And right from the very beginning, it was as much a social as an economic integration between those people. Hudson's Bay Company was entirely involved in commercial relationships, not colonization, and it evolved into its own culture of a mixed heritage between those two groups of people as it spread across the continent using pre-existing trade networks that spread all the way to the Rocky Mountains. And it's very formative for the foundation of our nation. All of those trade networks and all of those commercial outposts that were developed over, well, 200 years formed the foundation for Great Britain's political and legal argument against the United States in order to preserve what later became Canadian identity and the nation of Canada. So its importance to the foundation of this country cannot be understated. It's political, it's economic, it's social. It ties into the very core of almost everything that amalgamated to form our nation.
We also asked Stephen how the Bay's roots played a large role in determining Canada's border.
So much of what the company was involved in laid the foundation for the existence of logistical and commercial networks that became the country of Canada. The border was really, yes, they drew it on a map along the 49th parallel, but it more or less paralleled where the company's operations were versus where the American colonists were flooding west, further south.
And finally, we explored what Canadians can learn from this.
I don't know that we can replicate any of the actions of the Hudson's Bay Company today to affect our current politics. And it's it's unfortunate to see such a major retailer face such hard times. But my interest as a historian has always been how the company pioneered institutions and developments that affected the foundation of the country. So I don't know in the last several decades that company has been fulfilling that role. I mean, it's lost its monopoly in 1870, and it shifted away from being in the fur trade as fur was no longer a valuable commodity at that point. Silk was replacing fur in terms of hats and clothing. And the beaver population was in decline. The company shifted towards real estate development. It had these significant land holdings along all of its trade networks in the north and western part of the country. And then after that, it shifted into becoming a more retail outlet that catered to the arriving colonists who were coming on the newly built railway in 1885 to service those people instead of the Indigenous people who had been its main customers and employers and contract workers for centuries before that.
We also spoke with retail analyst Craig Patterson about the broader retail impact this could have on Canada and potential redevelopments for HBC prime locations.
Well, I mean, Hudson's Bay's liquidation probably would mean the end of department stores in Canada. It's the last traditional department store that we have in the country that carries, such things as large appliances, furniture, cosmetics, and beauty. So this really would be, if this was the end of the chain as we know it as a department store, this would be the end of the department store in Canada. It really depends, I think, on the urban retail space, because Hudson's Bay has some pretty diverse real estate. It's got some downtown stores. The opportunities for those stores, if Hudson's Bay was to not occupy them, would be to redevelop these into something quite new. Well, they would be new. We would see a redevelopment, possibly something like what we would see in, say, Minneapolis. There was a department store there called Dayton's, and the 1.2 million square foot building was converted to something called the Dayton's Project, which is a large mixed use project. So we may see this real estate repurposed. In our suburbs, where there are the vast majority of the Hudson Bay stores, which are in shopping centers, the shopping center landlords are going to have to look to repurpose these spaces. And that could maybe occasionally be one single anchor store. I don't know if that would be a Walmart or something like that. Very often, these retailers will pick a standalone box and may not go into a mall, or these mall landlords may look to redevelop these boxes where Hudson's Bay was. So they may put other retailers in there. They may split the space up and try to integrate it into the shopping center and put new retailers in. Some could be small, some could be like Winners, which seems to be expanding like crazy despite everything. And other things could be added to these shopping centers where these Hudson Bay stores were, such as, say, like pickleball courts. This seems to be a big trend right now with shopping center landlords, particularly this year. So we might see some of that as well. So I think that we would see a repurposing of these spaces, but it's going to take a few years to do it. Again, if Hudson's Bay does shut down.
We also discussed how Canadian retailers can avoid similar issues.
Hudson's Bay's woes to a degree are due to, I think, a lack of financing and investment in the company. So the chain, the stores really did go downhill. There was not the best retail experience for people in the stores. I mean, we had a situation where we had escalators not working. In some cases, literally the stores had to close because of heat and of not having HVAC systems which could support air conditioning for the stores to keep open during a hot summer day. So I mean, this is a really low bar. The warning for other retailers would be don't do what Hudson's Bay did and let your stores go to waste, essentially. But I think to a degree, some of this was on purpose. I mean, I think that the company was looking at a lot of cost cutting, divesting, and moving funds to other locations and mortgaging these properties to the hilt over a period of about 24 months.
A new global report finds that residents of Finland are the happiest people in the world again. The Northern European country is leading the world in happiness for the 8th year in a row. Today's World Happiness Report by the Wellbeing Research Center at the University of Oxford says that the top 20 happiest countries include 14 Western industrial countries, with Canada at number 18. The United States has fallen to its lowest ever position at 24th, and Afghanistan is again ranked as the unhappiest country in the world. I'm Teresa Skupik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Good night, Canada.